When it comes to video games, customization is extremely important. People like a gameplay experience that is uniquely tailored to them, probably because of how naturally immersive video games are. If a video game does a good job of making you feel part of its world, people want to express themselves however they can, just like in real life. Whether that be an item offered within the game, or a custom mod created by the player. That's what entertainment is. People creating things that they enjoy and then sharing them with other people. But video game players and their creators have a very unique bond that you don't really get with any other form of media. Because video games are a collection of code downloaded to your console or PC, anyone who knows how to program can rearrange that coding however they want to, sometimes without the consent of the developers. But when developers and players work together, we truly see something special, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. What are mods? Why are they so important to video games and video game history? And why are mods becoming more and more rare these days? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Let's get into it. I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time at my desk, so getting up and stretching is very important for me. That's why I'm happy to announce this video's sponsor, flexispot. They are the best adjustable standing desks on the market in my opinion. I've wanted one for a very long time, and they're pretty reasonably priced as well. The process of setting it up was extremely easy for me, especially compared to my last desk. It took me like 3 times longer with the desk I had before. I personally got the E1 L-shaped desk. I thought it was so cool that you could actually have a standing desk in an L shape. I didn't know you could actually do that. You can get regular desks too, you can get bamboo top, you can get the white top. I got the black top. I like having everything all black on my desk. As you can see, it can easily fit my 2 monitors and my PC. I attached this little cup holder thing onto it that I got off Amazon and found this big mouse pad that covered the whole front side of the desk. It's incredibly easy to adjust these things. These are what my controls look like. I have my 1 for my sitting position and then 2 for my standing position. It's really quick, only takes a few seconds. I'm actually really happy with this product and I'm glad they're my first sponsor. If you want to get your own standing desk, check out the link that I have in the description. I highly recommend it. Again, thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into it. Games like Lode Runner in 1983 came with their own custom level editor, which made the process of creating custom maps quite easy. Most early mods were like this, usually just maps and custom characters. In the late 80s and early 90s, we would see the rise of the concept known as the game engine. Developers started licensing out the framework to their game, allowing up-and-coming developers to use that framework to create their own unique experience with their own unique assets. One of the biggest innovators in game engines and mods during the early 90s was game developer id Software. Founded in 1991 by John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, Tom Hall, and John Romero, id Software would work on their first IP, Commander Keen, a side-scrolling platformer game. After the completion of the game, they began licensing their game engine to other developers. The following year, id Software would create an entire new genre of games, releasing Wolfenstein 3D, the first 3D first-person shooter. Technically, it was what you would call 2.5D, where everything appeared in 3D, but you could only act on a 2D plane, but it was still quite revolutionary. Although the team did not intend on having mod support for the game, people began making their own mods anyways. After seeing this, John Carmack and Romero took a unique approach, going on to assure modders that there would be no issues with copyright, allowing people to create mods with no restrictions. This would also heavily inspire id Software to intentionally incorporate modding to their future titles from this point on. Again, just 1 year later, id Software would release probably the most iconic first-person shooter ever created, Doom. Doom consisted of the player traversing through levels, hunting down demons, trying to make it to the end. This shoot-'em-up, gory style of game would inspire an entire generation of gamers and game creators for decades to come. Doom was also the first game to really have a very large modding community that was also backed and encouraged by the developers. id Software knew that mods would only boost the sales of their game and extend the life of it indefinitely. Doom was already a groundbreaking game for its time, so mods could really take it to that next level. There were several custom level editors and modding tools that were made over the following years, such as the Doom Editor utility and Dehacked. Shortly after the release of the first mods of Doom, the game became completely open source, allowing mod creators to charge money while owing nothing to the original creators, id Software. While at the time this seemed like a very financially bad decision, this resulted in a heavy boost of sales for Doom. Thousands of custom levels and mods are made and are still being made and celebrated to this day. A lot of custom levels that were made during this time would even show up in later releases as part of the main game. Some modders like Tom Willits were later hired on to id Software as well. But this was definitely not the end of id Software's legacy. In 1996, id Software released the first ever true 3D first-person shooter, Quake. Much like Doom, Quake consisted of the player going through levels, slaying monsters, trying to make it to the end, but Quake's multiplayer mode also became widely popular as well due to its unique playstyle, that fast-paced movement in a 3D environment. This movement would also highly encourage a style of gaming called speedrunning, where a player would try to traverse through levels at world record paces. Heavily inspired by their previous release, Doom, id Software made some groundbreaking improvements to their new game engine. With real-time 3D rendering and something called binary space partitioning, 3D graphics took off. Quake became responsible for one of the biggest forks in video game history. A fork, when referring to software, is when one piece of software is used as a foundation for another piece of software, which is essentially what mods and game engines do. Quake licensed out their game engine to many creators and saw numerous mods and even full releases of other games created using their engine over many years. id Software also came up with some rather groundbreaking solutions to laggy online gameplay at the time, such as the release of Quake World, which was a version of the Quake engine that drastically improved online play with something called client-side prediction, making the overall experience much less laggy. One of the first big mods created for this game was called Team Fortress. This was a multiplayer capture the flag game mode that introduced the class system style of shooter, restricting players to certain weapons and abilities based off of their class. This style of game is pretty common today, but made its debut as an early Quake mod. But Team Fortress would actually become much more than just a mod in the following years, which we will get to in a moment. Later on in 1999, the Quake engine would become completely open source, making it one of the most heavily modified pieces of video game software ever. Without Quake, the video game industry would look very different from how it does now, for better or worse. Quake is often considered to be the godfather of modern gaming, putting a huge emphasis on first-person shooters and 3D graphics. But a couple years before Quake became open source, there was one particular up-and-coming developer that they licensed their game engine to that caused this massive fork in video game history. That company is known as Valve. Shortly after the release of Quake, ex-Microsoft employees Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington were looking to start their own game development company. Gabe had worked for Microsoft for 13 years, developing a lot of game-related programming during his time there. For Valve's very first game, they licensed out the Quake engine to begin creating their own. Although Valve's engine didn't technically have a name at the time, it would later be called the Gold Source engine. But before that, they named it after their very first game, Half-Life. Half-Life was a story-driven experience that had the player, Gordon Freeman, attempting to shut a portal to another dimension. Fighting aliens in a big open world setting with little to no cutscenes gave the game a rather unique feel for its time and received much acclaim by the community and critics alike. The game also featured a multiplayer mode. Even though the Quake engine was the starting point for Valve's first game engine, Gabe later stated that almost none of the coding from the original Quake engine made it to the final version of their own. But this new engine was designed in a way to be extremely modifiable, with the intention of having it work for other games that they plan on making in the future. This also made it in turn very easy to create mods for. Valve, much like id Software, was very aware as to how important mods were to the community, and actually acquired several mods and modding tools during the late 90s and early 2000s. For example, Valve acquired the custom map making tool for Quake called WorldCraft, which eventually turned into the Valve Hammer Editor, the official level editor for Gold Source. To promote their new engine and software development kit to aspiring game developers, Valve wanted to do something a little bit different. I mentioned the mod Team Fortress earlier. Well, Valve actually hired the original mod creators to create a mod of their own new game, Half-Life. A lot of people actually think that Team Fortress started as the Half-Life mod, but it was originally created for Quake. The Half-Life version would release April 7th, 1999, being called Team Fortress Classic. Using this as a promotional tool for the new engine, people were able to see just how versatile the Gold Source engine was, and this would inspire many new creators to start making games of their own. One of those people was college student Min Lee. Throughout his time in college, Lee loved gaming and had even worked on several mods for the Quake engine during his time there. In his last semester, Lee wanted to create his own game as a more ambitious project to potentially help himself get hired once he graduated. Lee had heard that the software development kit for the Gold Source engine would be releasing soon, so he decided to start working on things like character models in the meantime while he waited. After the Gold Source SDK released, Lee quickly put together a game over the next month using the characters he had been creating. Lee worked with another developer, Jess Cliff, to help him create a website, and Jeff also had connections to the mapping community. Through his help, they were able to create custom levels and now had a beta version of the game that they were ready to test. That game would be known as Counter-Strike. Initially releasing in June of 1999, it was very obvious early on that this mod was something special. The game pitted two teams against each other in a multiplayer scenario, the counter-terrorists defending an objective while the terrorists attempted to destroy it. The game was naturally very competitive by design, offering a very unique multiplayer experience that hadn't really been seen yet. People quickly flocked from other games to this one, and the game's popularity quickly grew. In the following year, after making it to their 5th beta for the game, the two developers were actually approached by Valve. Continuing their trend of acquiring mods for a full release, they would do the exact same thing for Counter-Strike. Hiring both Min Lee and Jess Cliff, Valve acquired the rights to Counter-Strike and released the first non-beta version of the game in September of 2000. Counter-Strike has a very long, detailed history that perhaps deserves its own video. The game would go on to have multiple sequels, with one even being developed and playtested during the making of this video. Later on, Valve would release the upgraded version to their engine, calling it Source, giving the older version, Gold Source, its name. And yes, there was a version of Counter-Strike made for this game, obviously, many people know that, and for later release Source 2. Many games were created from or inspired by Source. Too many to name in this video, really. I know a lot of people are going to end up mentioning games that I did not personally mention in this video, but there's just too many. Counter-Strike is widely considered to be the greatest competitive shooter ever created, and it's crazy to think just how long this line of inspiration was to get to that point. Without Doom, there wouldn't be a Quake. Without Quake, there wouldn't be a Half-Life, and without Half-Life, there wouldn't be a Counter-Strike. It's really cool to see how much gamers and game creators worked together in these early years to create some of the most beloved games of all time. It's honestly pretty rare nowadays to see devs have such a close relationship with modders, as the distance between the two grows greater and greater every year. The more money that comes into gaming, the less chances studios are willing to take. Having your game be open source or even just licensing out software for people to freely develop mods seems pretty risky, unless the engine is specifically designed for that purpose, like Epic Games' Unreal Engine. But just because it's rare, that doesn't necessarily mean that it never happens anymore.
Смотри в оба.
Now, some of you might immediately know where I'm going with this as soon as you see this footage, but for the uninitiated, allow me to explain. Releasing in 2009, Arma 2 was the second installment of the Arma franchise. The game was designed as a military simulator, or milsim, putting an emphasis on realistic gameplay and strategy, unlike a lot of shooters at the time with their flashy arena-style gameplay. And this game, much like others mentioned in this video, had a large emphasis on mod support, being released with easy-to-use tools to modify and create new content for the game. And due to the game's hardcore nature, it would inspire some pretty creative mods too, with one in particular gaining a lot of popularity. That mod was called DayZ. The original DayZ mod was an open-world zombie survival game that required the Arma 2 Operation Arrowhead expansion pack to run. The gaming industry hadn't really seen anything like DayZ, and it was truly a unique idea for its time. It was marketed as a more difficult game, giving the player little to no help, which really aided in its immersive nature. In just the first 3 months, the DayZ mod had over 1 million downloads and contributed to at least 300,000 sales of Arma 2 alone. After receiving a considerable amount of success early on, the creator of the mod, Dean Hall, announced that he and dev studio Bohemian Interactive would begin working on a standalone version of the game over the next few years, releasing their first early access version of the standalone game with Valve's game platform Steam on December 16th, 2013. But continuing the trend of this video, the line of mods didn't just end with DayZ. Amongst those 1 million people that first downloaded that DayZ mod, one of those people was Brendan Green. Inspired by the game's open world concept and gritty nature, Green wanted to create his own mod for the game, so he began learning to code as he played. After the release of Hunger Games and taking inspiration from the 2000 film Battle Royale, Green wanted to create his own similar experience where players fought to the death until one player was left standing. Green eventually finished the mod in 2013, calling it DayZ Battle Royale. There was some interest in the mod early on, but after DayZ began moving toward the standalone version, the original Arma 2 mod waned in popularity. Because of this, Green would transfer the mod from Arma 2 to the new Arma 3 engine. Green would also get hired as a consultant by dev studio Sony Online Entertainment, who wanted to make their own Battle Royale game called H1Z1, thus starting a long line of Battle Royale games created by other publishers for many years to come. After his time working on H1Z1, popularity in the Battle Royale genre increased heavily, and Green would ultimately work with dev studio Bluehole to make the ultimate Battle Royale experience. Using Green's online alias PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or PUBG, was born, with early access beginning of March of 2017 and then fully released in the same year in December. PUBG quickly grew in popularity. Many streamers and content creators flocked to the game, skyrocketing its popularity and making it one of the most played games of all time. The genre of battle royales is still growing to this day, many of the most popular games in the last 8 years being heavily inspired by PUBG's success, all of which started with a mod. Again, obviously I won't be able to go over every single mod ever created in this video. Here is just a list list of some notable mods that released as standalone games. Hell, I skipped over the entire genre of MOBAs, which pretty much started from a mod of StarCraft that inspired a mod for Warcraft 3 called Dota, eventually becoming one of the most popular games ever created. There are so many instances of mods becoming full-fledged games like this. It's quite remarkable how much of a role modding has played into the success of video games. It's very obvious gaming has a unique relationship to its consumers that no other form of media really has. Gamers are actually able to directly inspire game developers, sometimes even become game developers themselves. Modding may not be as common or I guess substantiated as it used to be, but it will always be the foundation of modern gaming. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. If you enjoyed the video, remember to modify that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you all soon with another video.